Hello everyone! Do you know where the word hacker comes from? I made this little hacker tool and that got me thinking a little bit about that. I made this little gadget with hacking in mind, and if you're new around here, don't worry, I'm not trying to infect your mom's Dell with something nasty, but rather I'm making little things like this to make working with old or special computer hardware a bit easier with open source hardware and software. You might have heard the first recorded use of a hacker in this context traces back to the MIT Tech Model Railroad Club all the way back in the 1950s, and about how the word made its way into a 1959 dictionary of club slang. But considering the fact that it was the subgroup of members who made the circuits that made the trains run that categorized themselves with the term hackers, it's pretty clear to me that the actual origin of the word probably has a lot less to do with illegally breaking into computer systems, and a lot more to do with modifying circuit boards with an actual hacksaw than what's made it into the history books. Now, I don't mean to get sidetracked with history of a model railroad club, but bear with me, we'll get to the hacking. I genuinely believe a lot of circuit board hacking with literal hacksaws simply must have happened at MIT, since when you're learning about and constantly modifying circuits, you will eventually want to make a physical change to a circuit board. And add that to the fact that printed circuit boards were expensive to have made in the 1950s, it's certainly not a stretch to imagine students literally hacking pieces off circuit boards, especially when the first recorded instance of the word from a 1955 meeting was, and I'm quoting Britannica here, that students were urged to turn the power off before hacking on the electrical system. So what does any of that have to do with this little gadget? Well, what we have here is my universal serial adapter, and it has USB-C on one end, a UART with all the control signals broken out in the middle, and what's usually known as an RS-232 or COM port on the other end. That means it'll connect to any PC between now and the IBM PC AT from 1984, not to mention the literal billions of microcontrollers produced every year. Absolutely none of those features are novel though, and if I just wanted a dongle that does USB to serial, I could just get that from AliExpress for $1 or $2, and if I just wanted a USB-C breakout board I can use to test cables and connections, I could do the same, and if I just wanted an RS-232 USB cable, I could just get that. Maybe you see where I'm going with this. I wanted something that does all of the above, but isn't wrapped in epoxy either. Since I've been making a lot of gadgets that connect to other gadgets via serial over the last year, I decided to make a hackable serial adapter that's also easy to modify and use to test things out before I put them on another PCB. And speaking of PCBs, they are a lot cheaper now than they were in the 1950s. Especially since this video is sponsored by JCPCB. I wouldn't be able to have all this fun making PCB prototypes without their support, so I'm super happy I get to play around with pretty much anything I like and show it off on YouTube without spending too much of my own money. If you're new to JCPCB and sign up using the link in the description, you'll get a ton of new customer coupons for your first order, and of course you support my little channel by doing so. With the coupons, you can get a stack of 6-layer PCBs for just $5. If you already have an account with JCPCB, I've also put a link to a $5 coupon. Like I hinted in the beginning of the video, this project is 100% open source. So if you'd like to have JCPCB make some of these for you, you can upload the files on GitHub, linked in the description, to JCPCB and have them made. Or just use the KiCad files as inspiration for your own things. I've always been happy with the service at JCPCB, and I've used them for years before getting sponsored, so I'm super happy they reached out and offered to support my channel. Besides being super hackable with all the control signals broken out, I also designed it to be somewhat easily configurable. You see, usually you would need a cable and an extra crossover adapter to connect two computers together using RS-232, and you would connect the serial port straight to a modem, for instance. Sometime in the future I hope to use this old serial and parallel port card in my PC XT build, and usually I would need a null modem adapter or a special crossover cable. The frustrating part about that isn't that you need another $3 adapter, but the fact that you can't always be sure the adapter also passes the control signals the way you want. Without the control signals, like RTS, CTS flow control for instance, you will have to configure both sides to work without them. And sometimes it'll also hurt the speed of the connection. So, instead of relying on external null modem adapters, I decided to make the polarity configurable on the board. Commodore Z, who I know for making the cool Cactus 6502 toggle switch computer, showed up on my Clubhouse Discord server and coincidentally just made a serial card for the VIC-20 and uses a neat little trick to make using jumpers pretty foolproof that I just had to borrow. Because usually jumpers have a tendency to be pretty confusing. Commodore Z got the trick from TechAV, and I suggest you check out both their websites I've linked in the description. The trick is to put signal pairs in jumper blocks where you always need two jumpers. When the jumpers are horizontal, it's configured straight, and when the jumpers are inserted vertically, it's configured to cross over the signals. Depending on how many control signals you use, you would do the same for RxTX, CTS-RTS, and DTR-DSR. So in this case, where I want to connect the universal serial adapter straight to a serial card inside another computer, I would configure it to cross over Rx and TX along with CTS-RTS by inserting the jumpers vertically. Easy as that. And if it's still a bit confusing, I suggest you check out the documentation on GitHub or just come say hi in the Hackerspace Clubhouse on Discord. Of course, there's also the option of using two of these serial adapters to connect two modern computers. Technically, if you have some good old quality cable, you can communicate like this for hundreds of meters if you go slow enough. If you're using two of these though, you'll need a little trick, since by default the RS-232 chip goes into sleep mode if it doesn't detect a cable connected to another RS-232 device. And since they're both sleeping by default, you'll need to wake up one of them manually. All you need to do is put a voltage on either of the input signals. So what I do here is simply connecting 5 volts to the DCD or carrier detect line to wake up the chip. As soon as I do that, the chip wakes up, puts the other lines in a passive state, but even though no transmission is going on, that'll still wake up the chip at the other end of the cable. And since they're both awake, I don't need to leave the cable connected. If I had it connected to the serial port of a computer, of course, I wouldn't need to do this, since the SP3243 chip would just wake up from being connected to a powered up serial port. If I wanted to shut it down even with an RS-232 cable connected, there is an optional RS-232 powered down jumper you can solder on, but I doubt anyone will really need that, as you can simply unplug the cable to put it back to sleep. But of course, this project is about anticipating the things you don't anticipate and making it easy to hack later, so that's why it's there. Actually, I have these two adapters connected to the same computer, so I can run a little speed test and see how fast they'll go. It's in a little Python script I wrote, so if you want to try it out, it's on GitHub with the hardware files and schematic. It'll work with any two serial ports connected to the same computer. The CH340 USB to UART chip is rated for up to 2 megabaud, but the SP3243 is only rated for up to 1 megabaud. The script isn't a super scientific test, but it does manage to break the 1 megabaud barrier and does manage to get through more than 1 megabit of data per second without getting errors. At 3 megabaud though, it lies flat on its back and doesn't manage to get much of anything through. But I'm pretty happy we're already doing better than the datasheets promise. Now, since this is a hacker tool, of course, it has headers that work well with jumper wires, and it's pretty great. The RS-232 part automatically powers down, so you can use the UART separately. But what I usually do is breadboard things before I commit them to a PCB. And even though this has all the signals broken out, it's not very handy to plug into a breadboard like this, and putting it next to the board is a bit impractical too. Also, if I only needed the RS-232 part, for instance, if I had a 6502 computer on a breadboard that I wanted to speak RS-232, I can't really do that when it's connected to the USB to serial chip. If only there was a way to separate the two parts. Now I wonder if I can just... Yes, that worked pretty well. A common practice to make boards snap apart like this is to use mouse bites, which are little non-plated through holes in a line on the board. They make it super easy to snap the board apart, but actually I didn't want that for this board, because it still needs to be sturdy enough to not break by accident. So what I did here was to remove the copper fill, make a little notch on each side, and then make a line of vias instead of mouse bites. That makes the board stronger than using mouse bites, but still snappable along the line of vias. I think there's also a risk it might pull more traces than we see here, breaking one of the parts. So in honor of those original hackers at MIT, I'm going to give the other way a try in the garage. If you tried this at home, please remember to use protective gear like a mask and protective glasses. Printed circuit boards are made from fiberglass, and the dust can cause all kinds of health issues if it gets in your eyes or lungs. If you try separating the boards, whichever way you choose, please stay safe and do so at your own risk. But with the board separated, the UART plugs straight into the breadboard, ready to use and power whatever you want. The RS-232 side doesn't come with headers pre-soldered though, so you'll have to do a bit of soldering yourself if you want to use it to take TTL serial to RS-232 levels. I recommend simply soldering a 90-degree header onto the solder jumper pads so they will plug into the breadboard. Besides that, you also need to connect the power header somehow. It doesn't align with a typical breadboard, but you can either put some header pins or some wires that can be connected to the breadboard. You might notice the USB-C side is also snappable, but if you just want to temporarily use it as a USB-C breakout board, all you have to do is cut the traces inside the solder jumper pads. You can use that to test if a cable has two sets of data lines, for instance. I haven't gone through half of the features of the board, but I'm sure you get the idea. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have over on my Hackerspace Clubhouse Discord server. The universal serial adapter is available on my store, and of course the design files are available on GitHub if you want to have it made yourself. The reason I decided to make it to begin with is that I'm upgrading my 6502 based single board computer, the 6501, to include USB-C and built-in UART. So to be able to test those new features, I decided to make the universal serial adapter. I think it ended up pretty cool in its own right. The new 6501 is already on the way, so keep an eye out for that as well. I'm certainly looking forward to playing Flappy Laris with only a single cable connected. Either way, thanks for watching.